Okay, so let's do practice quiz 13. Before doing that, let me just mention a few things here. So the main three political affiliations in the US are Democrat, Republican, and Libertarian. Okay, let's look at a question now. So here's my question. Do women and men choose party affiliation at the same rates? So for example, if 30% of men are Democrats, does that mean that 30% of women are Democrats, and so forth? So let's get going here. Well, the answer is either yes or no. Let's see. So if the answer to the question is yes, then we say that gender and party affiliation are independent variables. If the answer to the question is no, then we say that gender and party are not independent variables. Okay, so we're going to try and answer this question. So to answer this question, we will use what is called a chi-square test. So now let's look at the example on the practice quiz. So it says below is data for gender versus party affiliation. Find the following. So A, state the null hypothesis for the chi-square test. Okay, and then we got it all the way through E. Let's start doing A first. Let's do below here. So here's our data down here. So we have our females and males and the weight of chosen in our sample. We took a sample here. So there's 762 the females are Democrats, 484 the male are Democrats. So I want to know if this data will then let us answer the question whether gender and party affiliation are independent. Okay, so let's first state our null hypothesis. So null hypothesis would be the following. It'd be that gender and party affiliation are independent variables. So pretty much that females and males choose the different parties at the same rates. Okay, so that's part A done. Part B then says find the degrees of freedom. So let's talk about that for the chi-squared. Okay, so here's how you compute the degrees of freedom. So the degrees of freedom for a chi-square are calculated using the following formula. So the degrees of freedom would be R minus 1, C minus 1. So in our case, the degrees of freedom would equal then, let's go down to our table here. Number of rows would be, that's a row, oops, that's a row right there, so 1. That's a second row, so 2. In columns, we'd have a column here, a column here, and a column here. So we have 2 rows, so it'd be 2 minus 1, then times 3 columns, so 3 minus 1. So that's going to be just equal to 2. Okay, so we've done that. We found the degrees of freedom. Now it says to compute the chi-squared value by hand. So let's start doing that. Okay, so the steps to doing this. Let's look at step 1. Okay, so step 1 here says add up all rows and columns in table. So let's take our table. It's up here. Take the whole table. Copy it. And let's paste it down here. So down here I'm going to write column sum or sums. And over here I'm going to write row sums. And here I'm going to write total. I'll explain that in a second. Okay, so to get the first column sum, I'm going to add these two together. So adding those two guys together, we get, we'll check when you add those, the 762 with the 484, you get 1246. Then moving on to the next one, adding these two, so when you add those, you get 566. Moving on to the next one's over here. So adding those two, so that you check when you add those, you get 945. Okay, so we've done the column sums then, and then we're going to do the row sums now, so we're going to add these now. So adding those guys, they'll let you check if you add those 762 plus 327 plus 468 in your calculator, you'll get 1557. And then if you add the second row sum here, so adding those three guys, they'll let you check, you get 1200. Okay, so we've done step 1 now. Let's go on to step 2. Actually, sorry, we haven't finished step 1 just yet. We have to find the total here. So the total could be obtained by adding this way. So adding column sums or adding the rows. They should give the same answer. So let you check when you add those. When you add those, you should get then, so adding, say these two here, you're going to get 2757. That should be the same as the answer you get from adding those ones. You can check that. Okay, now let's go on to step 2. Okay, so here's step 2 here. Let's find the proportions in samples. So let's call P1 proportion of women in our sample. So it's going to be the first row, because the first row is all women, divided by total. So it's going to be then 1557 divided by total here 2757, and let's write that as a decimal. So plug it into your calculator, you check it's 0.5647. Okay, let's do the same thing now for the men. Okay, doing the same thing for the men here. So call it P2, proportion of men in sample. So it'll be second row, because the second row is all the males. So it's 1200 out of 2757, and that works out as 0.4357. Okay, so that's step 2. Now let's go on to step 3. Okay, so here's step 3. It says to find the expected values if gender and party affiliation are independent variables. Multiply the proportion of men times each column sum, do the same for a proportion of women. Okay, so let's look at that. Okay, so I pasted my table here, so let's follow what it says. Multiply proportion of men times each column sum, do the same proportion of women. Okay, let's look at the first column sum. It's 1246. So you're going to put 1246 here, and 1246 here. And the first 1246 will be multiplied by the proportion of women in our sample, and that's going to be the 0.5647 guy here. And the men guy, we multiplied by proportion of men, so it's 0.4357, 53, sorry, because here. So doing these calculations in your calculator, let's do it here. So the first one will get, so plugging in your calculator, you get 703. Well, it's 6162, say. I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places, so it'll be 703.62. Now let's do the same for the next one. So we get 524.38 rounding to 2 decimal places. Then we do the same for the libertarian column. So let's look at the column sum for libertarian. It was 566, so it'll be 566 here. So here, and down here. And the top one's multiplied by this guy. And the top one's multiplied by this proportion of men. And working these out, I'll let you check, you get So you get 319.62 for the first one, and for the second one, you'll get 246.38. Now let's do the last one. So do the last one, the column sum for the last one's 945. So you do the same thing with 945 here. Just going to write the answers here. So you should get those when you work it out. Okay, so let's now go on to step 4. So we're done with step 3. So going on to step 4 now. Okay, so here's step 4. It says now subtract actual value from expected value, then square the result and divide by the expected value. Add up all answers. This is your chi-squared value. Okay, so let's start doing that. Here's my table. So let's start filling this in. So we're going to have here, so actual value. Let's go up to the original table right here. So it's the first guy here, it's 762. 762. That's actual. Minus expected value. So we just figured out here 703.62. Goes here. And then you square this. And then you're going to divide it by the expected value. Expected value is 703. So we're going to figure this out now. So let's go to our calculator. Okay, so let me enter this expression into the calculator. So it'll be parenthesis. Oops, click on here. Parenthesis. So it's 762 minus 703.62. Close parenthesis. Then you're going to click raised. So it'll be this button here. To the second power, then divide it by, so divide it by 703.62 and equals, so 4.84, round that to, 4.84 I guess. Okay, let's go back now and enter this in. So entering this value in here, we have our 4.84. Then move on to the next one. So moving on to the next one. So I'm going to write the answer there. So it's 484 was the, let's see up here, the actual value. Then the predicted value was 524.38. So you're going to take those two numbers and subtract them. That's what I did there. Square the result and then divide by 542.38. And I'll let you check, you get 6.28. So the other ones here, I'll let you check, you get these. So just to check, this one up here is 327. That should be the actual value for libertarian women. So go up here, 327. That's actual value here for. Actually, I just noticed actually there's a mistake here. This should be libertarian on this. We've independent for some reason, and I think on the top one we've got independent also. It should be libertarian. All these. It'd be Democrat, Libertarian, Republican. Okay, so the Libertarian is 327. That's how I got the 327 there. And the 319 was the expected value, so there. That's how I got that guy. So I just did the same thing for the other 4 here. So we're out of time in this video, so we'll pick up in part 2 where we left off here.